The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced many millions of people and has its roots in a colonial act carried out more than a century ago. With Israel declaring war on the Gaza Strip after an unprecedented attack by the armed Palestinian group Hamas on Saturday, the world's eyes are again sharply focused on what might come next. Hamas fighters have killed more than 800 Israelis in assaults on multiple towns in southern Israel. In response, Israel has launched a bombing campaign in the Gaza Strip, killing more than 500 Palestinians. It has mobilized troops along the Gaza border, apparently in preparation for a ground attack. Here's a simple guide to break down one of the world's longest-running conflicts. But before starting the video, please subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet and hit that bell icon to receive every video notification. What was the Balfour Declaration? More than 100 years ago, on November 2, 1917, Britain's then Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter addressed to Lionel Walter Rothschild, a figurehead of the British Jewish community. The letter is known as the Balfour Declaration. A British mandate was created in 1923 and lasted until 1948. During that period, the British facilitated mass Jewish immigration. Many of the new residents were fleeing Nazism in Europe, and they also faced protests and strikes. Palestinians were alarmed by their country's changing demographics and British confiscation of their lands to be handed over to Jewish settlers. What happened during the 1930s? Escalating tensions eventually led to the Arab Revolt, which lasted from 1936 to 1939. In April 1936, the newly formed Arab National Committee called on Palestinians to launch a general strike, withhold tax payments and boycott Jewish products to protest British colonialism and growing Jewish immigration. By the second half of 1939, Britain had massed 30,000 troops in Palestine. Villages were bombed by air, curfews imposed, homes demolished, and administrative detentions and summary killings were widespread. In those 3 years of revolt, 5,000 Palestinians were killed, 15,000 to 20,000 were wounded and 5,600 were imprisoned. What was the UN partition plan? By 1947, the Jewish population had ballooned to 33% of Palestine, but they owned only 6% of the land. The United Nations adopted Resolution 181, which called for the partition of Palestine into Arab and Jewish states. The Palestinians rejected the plan because it allotted about 56% of Palestine to the Jewish state, including most of the fertile coastal region. At the time, the Palestinians owned 94% of historic Palestine and comprised 67% of its population. The 1948 Nakba, or the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. In April 1948, more than 100 Palestinian men, women and children were killed in the village of Deir Yassin on the outskirts of Jerusalem. That set the tone for the rest of the operation, and from 1947 to 1949, more than 500 Palestinian villages, towns and cities were destroyed in what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe, in Arabic. An estimated 15,000 Palestinians were killed, including in dozens of massacres. The Zionist movement captured 78% of historic Palestine. The remaining 22% was divided into what are now the occupied West Bank and the besieged Gaza Strip. An estimated 750,000 Palestinians were forced out of their homes. On May 15, 1948, Israel announced its establishment. The following day, the First Arab-Israeli War began and fighting ended in January 1949 after an armistice between Israel and Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan and Syria. In December 1948, the UN General Assembly passed Resolution 194, which calls for the right of return for Palestinian refugees. The years after the Nakba, at least 150,000 Palestinians remained in the newly created State of Israel and lived under a tightly controlled military occupation for almost 20 years before they were eventually granted Israeli citizenship. In 1964, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, was formed, and a year later, the Fatah political party was established. The Nakba, or the Six-Day War and the Settlements. On June 5, 1967, Israel occupied the rest of historic Palestine, including the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Syrian Golan Heights and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula during the Six-Day War against a coalition of Arab armies. For some Palestinians, this led to a second forced displacement, or Nakba, which means setback in Arabic. In December 1967, the Marxist-Leninist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine was formed. Over the next decade, a series of attacks and plane hijackings by leftist groups drew the world's attention to the plight of the Palestinians. Settlement construction began in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. The First Intifada 1987-1993. The First Palestinian Intifada erupted in the Gaza Strip in December 1987 after 4 Palestinians were killed when an Israeli truck collided with 2 vans carrying Palestinian workers. Protests spread rapidly to the West Bank, with young Palestinians throwing stones at Israeli army tanks and soldiers. It also led to the establishment of the Hamas movement, an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood that engaged in armed resistance against the Israeli occupation. The Israeli army's heavy-handed response was encapsulated by the "break their bones" policy advocated by then Defense Minister Yitzhak Rabin. In 1988, the Arab League recognized the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people. According to the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem, 1,070 Palestinians were killed by Israeli forces during the Intifada, including 237 children. More than 175,000 Palestinians were arrested. The Intifada also prompted the international community to search for a solution to the conflict. The Oslo Years and the Palestinian Authority. The Intifada ended with the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1993 and the formation of the Palestinian Authority, PA, an interim government that was granted limited self-rule in pockets of the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. The PLO recognized Israel on the basis of a two-state solution and effectively signed agreements that gave Israel control of 60% of the West Bank and much of the territory's land and water resources. The PA was supposed to make way for the first elected Palestinian government running an independent state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip with its capital in East Jerusalem, but that has never happened. Critics of the PA view it as a corrupt subcontractor to the Israeli occupation that collaborates closely with the Israeli military in clamping down on dissent and political activism against Israel. In 1995, Israel built an electronic fence and concrete wall around the Gaza Strip, snapping interactions between the split Palestinian territories. The Second Intifada. The Second Intifada began on September 28, 2000, when Likud opposition leader Ariel Sharon made a provocative visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound with thousands of security forces deployed in and around the Old City of Jerusalem. Clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians and injured 200 over 2 days. The incident sparked a widespread armed uprising. During the Intifada, Israel caused unprecedented damage to the Palestinian economy and infrastructure. Israel reoccupied areas governed by the Palestinian Authority and began construction of a separation wall that, along with rampant settlement construction, destroyed Palestinian livelihoods and communities. Settlements are illegal under international law, but over the years, hundreds of thousands of Jewish settlers have moved to colonies built on stolen Palestinian land. At the time the Oslo Accords were signed, just over 110,000 Jewish settlers lived in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Today, the figure is more than 700,000, living on more than 100,000 hectares, 390 square miles, of land expropriated from the Palestinians. The Palestinian Division and the Gaza blockade. PLO leader Yasser Arafat died in 2004, and a year later, the Second Intifada ended. Israeli settlements in the Gaza Strip were dismantled, and Israeli soldiers and 9,000 settlers left the enclave. A year later, Palestinians voted in a general election for the first time. Hamas won a majority. However, a Fatah-Hamas civil war broke out, lasting for months, resulting in the deaths of hundreds of Palestinians. Hamas expelled Fatah from the Gaza Strip, and Fatah, the main party of the Palestinian Authority, resumed control of parts of the West Bank. In June 2007, Israel imposed a land, air and naval blockade on the Gaza Strip, accusing Hamas of terrorism. The wars on the Gaza Strip. Israel has launched 4 protracted military assaults on Gaza, in 2008, 2012, 2014 and 2021. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed, including many children, and tens of thousands of homes, schools and office buildings have been destroyed. Rebuilding has been next to impossible because the siege prevents construction materials, such as steel and cement, from reaching Gaza. In 2014, over a span of 50 days, Israel killed more than 2,100 Palestinians, including 1,462 civilians and close to 500 children. During the assault, called Operation Protective Edge by the Israelis, about 11,000 Palestinians were wounded, 20,000 homes were destroyed and 500,000 people displaced. Hope you find the video helpful. Before going, if you liked the video, please share it with others and subscribe the channel. Until the next time, goodbye.